This is our Arts Advocacy panel, moderated by Maritza Carmona, featuring Coco Killingsworth, Candice Anderson, Eli Dvorkin, and Natalia Nakazawa. Clap it up for them.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Brittany. And thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you to the Museum Hue board, the BRIC staff, production team, everyone who has helped put this together behind the scenes, so many people that we can't see today. As Brittany said, I'm the Senior Director of Government and External Affairs for BRIC, and I'm also a proud board member of Museum Hue. I oversee government fundraising, advocacy, civic engagement at BRIC, and yes, I am proudly double dipping today as a Museum Hue board member, as our president Wes Jackson said. Before we dive in, I want to take a moment to congratulate Stephanie and the entire Museum Hue team on an incredible 10 years of service to our sector and to our communities. I met Stephanie a decade ago when she was launching Museum Hue, and I was working at El Museo del Barrio. Her work and her journey have been a huge inspiration to me, and I'm sure to so many of us in this room. So clap it up for Stephanie and the Museum Hue team. A huge, huge congratulations. We are absolutely honored that you chose to return to BRIC on your 10th anniversary. We have a long history, and again, congratulations. We are all deeply, deeply inspired by all you have accomplished. So today, we're going to talk about how we can build a better world. Like one of our earlier panelists said, a world where justice is the norm and the arts are thriving. We'll explore how to advocate for reinvestment in the arts, artists, our cultural workers, and our neighborhoods, because we know that when we invest in the arts, we're also investing in education, in health, and public safety. In New York City, and across cities across the country, the budget for arts and culture is barely 1% in city budgets. In recent years, under this federal administration, we've seen a disturbing trend of disinvestment in the arts. Many organizations have lost funding, including Museum Hue and BRIC, to only have that funding reinstated. That's not only frustrating and disorienting, but it's really unacceptable. So today, we're going to strategize. We're going to demystify advocacy. We're going to share data. And most importantly, we're going to dream and co-conspire. To help us do that, I'm excited to introduce an amazing group of panelists who honestly need no introduction, but I'll keep it brief. I'd love to give each of you also a moment to share a bit about your work, your journey in the arts advocacy or general advocacy space, how it shaped you, and what you do today. So very briefly, to my left, Coco Killingsworth is the chief, clap it up, yes, is the Chief Experience and Impact Officer at Brooklyn Academy of Music, our neighbor next door, BAM. During her tenure at BAM, her work has included leading education, community engagement initiatives, strategic programming, and she has led some of BAM's most iconic programming, including Dance Africa and BAM's annual tribute to Martin Luther King. She is the chair of the Cultural Institutions Group, a group of 34 organizations, and is an advocate and a huge supporter of the cultural sector in this role in her personal work. Candice Anderson is the executive director of Cool Culture and has devoted her career to advancing racial justice and cultural equity for BIPOC communities. She's previously served as director of childcare and Head Start at New York City's Administration for Children's Services and as a senior policy associate for childcare. She is on the Advisory Commission for Participatory Budgeting Commission and the New York City Department of Education's Arts Committee to the panel of education policy. Okay, Eli, before I go to Eli, let's go to Natalia Nakazawa. Natalia is a Queens-based interdisciplinary creative practitioner. Shout out to Queens, we're in Brooklyn, but I'm also a Queens girl, so shout out to Queens. She's an interdisciplinary creative practitioner working across mediums of painting, textiles, and social practice. She utilizing strategies drawn from a range of experiences in the fields of education, arts administration, and community activism. Her work draws on the ranges of all these experiences. She's served as assistant director of the EFA studio program for almost 10 years. She received an MFA from California College of the Arts and an MS in education from Queens College. Again, shout out to Queens. We'll let you do a little bit more of an introduction. Eli is the Education and Policy Director at the Center for the Urban Future, where he oversees the development of all publications and advances CUF's research and recommendations on the critical policy challenges facing the city and state. He's been the author of numerous CUF reports, some of which he will be speaking about today, and will be helping us center a conversation around a lot of data. So I'm going to pass it on to each of you individually just to speak about your work, what has brought you here, what has inspired you, whether it's your role specifically at BAM or outside in your professional setting, then we'll jump into the questions.
Well, thank you. That was a mouthful, and you did it really well. So let's clap it up for Maritza. As Maritza shared, I'm Coco Killingsworth, and my titles are up there behind me. But I think what I've said to people, what we joke about, is my title is VP of Soul at BAM, and that's really trying to, in working with an institution like BAM that has a history that means a lot of different things to different people. My purpose at BAM is to make sure that the people who maybe are not as represented all year long at everything we do, but still make BAM what it is in the borough that it is in, that really feel that they're safe, represented, amplified, accessible, and that we keep the drumbeat that is the heartbeat of BAM in this cultural district going. So that's my work. It's a mouthful. You can't have that be my whole title. So we go with experience and impact and try to figure out from there. My journey in advocacy in the arts is a little bit interesting. I actually my advocacy really started with working with young people. I helped start a high school in Brooklyn, but the work that I was doing was around human rights education and helping young people connect to what was happening in their community to what was happening in other parts of the world. So really forming global citizens and training young people to train each other and learning around what civic engagement looks like. And so when I came into my role at BAM, which was around education and community engagement, I came with an organizing perspective. I came with an advocacy perspective. So I was always infusing that into the work that I did. Lots of things happened to me in my journey at BAM, but I really got into amplifying, like I said, the programs that aren't paid as much of attention to, or we're not selling tickets to, but we have to show up for just as much. So I made sure that those programs were what we were speaking about when we were talking about BAM. And that led me into being a part of this greater community, not just working within a silo in BAM. And then that led me into the working within the cultural institutions group, which I'll talk about later. But and I would say I was a little bit of a reluctant leader, but by the time I got into my role as the chair, there was a number of people like Lucy, like Taryn, like Melody, like a lot of people in this room that were already we had started working as a coalition, so I felt comfortable in this role. The last thing I'll say, because it may come up, is that my 2 children are here in front, so if I'm getting heckled at any point, it's them, but I'm also supported, and a lot of my arts advocacy is about them and making sure that they have programs in their school and that they have the opportunities that I'm seeking for them, I'm also sharing with other parents and other families to make sure that they find too. So that was a little long, I apologize.
It's good to great, Coco. I wanted to say that I think that reluctant leaders are often the strongest, so kudos to you. I'm Candice Anderson. My pronouns are she and they. I am a Brooklynite, a photographer, a writer. I don't get to those things as much as I would like, but it is always at the top of my mind as I approach my work. I want to share a little bit about myself personally. My parents are both great believers in public service. Both of them served as teachers at some point in their lives, and so that's really what guides me. The idea of serving community is really critical, and when I was younger, I thought of community as Black community. I then went off to college where I had an incredible experience connecting with people from around the world and really understood, despite my own identity as I saw myself as a Black person and marginalized, I was very much an American, and really appreciate the ways in which they pointed out the kind of individualistic, capitalist things that I brought to my way of being and practice, and which I tried to learn from in everything that I do. So my professional training is actually as an advocate, so early childhood, K through 12 education, youth services. And what I want to say about that experience is that when I first started, I found myself in a room mostly full of white folks, white men, to be explicit, who were making decisions about what ought to happen to people of color and their communities. And then I made the shift. I was really excited about coming to Cool Culture. Our mission is to ensure that people of culture and people with limited means have what they need to thrive, because we believe that arts and culture is a public good. And when I got there, I was really surprised to find out how much fragility there was about any kind of conversation about race. This is, of course, before the pandemic, before the racial reckoning. And fast forward, I think that has certainly changed, because the conversations that young folks who have been involved in the civil rights movement have forced folks to have really has brought about more dialogue about people of color. My concern has been, however, that because in this country, in the city, relating to arts, we have a scarcity mindset, that a lot of that conversation is performance rather than indirect experience, and that conversation is also limiting to communities who truly have a deep need, because of historic inequities in funding for arts, to have more equitable funding. And the last thing I want to note before I pass the mic is that there is something very unique about the arts advocacy climate that is different from early childhood education, K-12 education, and that it is a jumble of public, private, and not as much kind of established centers that make it difficult to address equity and the ways that we might advocate for education. And I think this is something that we can all spend time thinking through as we look to build solutions to the issues that we face. I will also say that for myself personally, as I watch the dismantling of our democracy, as I witness deportations on a mass scale, as I'm concerned about whether my brothers and sisters have access to health care, and am worried about future generations and their ability to breathe clean air and have an environment that's sustainable for human life, that it is incredibly important to me to lean into what I see as my purpose and to remain grounded in community. So I will stop there. I think there's a lot more discussion to be had.
Testing, okay, just making sure this worked. Wonderful, that was so wonderful. And also I just wanna say thank you for everyone here. It's just incredible to see how we all show up for each other. And I think that's the impetus around education, community, and we just have to do it together. And we've got to be messy. We've got to have good conversations. So I'm so thankful to be a part of this panel. I do want to give a shout out to Libertad Guerra, who was actually supposed to be here today, but double booked herself because she's so brilliant. And so I'm here in her stead, but I'm so pleased to be here. And my name again is Natalia Nakazawa. I'm here really repping the Clemente, but also have a very long history with arts advocacy and deeply rooted in education. Education is what really opened my eyes to how we speak to each other, how we to connect to each other, and what we want to do when we're together. So I think that, with that kind of mindset, we can do anything and we can move forward with hope. And I'm just excited to tackle that. I do have some slides, and I'm so sorry, but there are so many facts. And like you said, I did work for so many years in education. I was just a DOE, Department of Education, special education teacher for years. And then I also worked with the Museum of Arts and Design and worked with the VP of Ed at the time, Kathleen Lewis, who was incredible. And we did so many talks and did so much advocacy work around arts education and the disparate and weird landscape of arts ed. So I know that facts really matter. And so I'm going to just lay on a few facts for us, but hopefully it'll be pretty painless. And really talking about the Clemente, because so many people don't know about it, and it's a 90,000 square foot space located in the Lower East Side. It's an incredible space of creativity, and we are taking on a huge project specifically around data, around advocacy, and really like closing that data gap, especially for Latinx communities. So I just wanted to shout out here that we co-founded, or Libertad actually really co-founded the Latinx Arts Consortium of New York, or LXNY, which is it's amazing. It's amazing, y'all. It's an alliance of over 50 Latinx serving cultural organizations across the 5 boroughs. And we are here because Latinx and Latinx are 30% of the population, and yet we are less than 2% of the cultural funding. So some of these stats, I think, are really important to understand, especially with underserved communities, and it's unreasonable. It's unreasonable. Okay, so maybe go to the next slide. I don't know if we can. Okay, great. So what are we fighting for? We're really fighting for visibility, and we're fighting for new types of narrative data. So we're really focusing on creating a whole new platform, a whole new way of searching for and finding more information about Latinx communities, organizations. What are we doing? Who are we serving? What are our stories? And so it's a big project, but I think it's really about creating a living, not just archive, but resource. And when these resources exist, educators can use them, schools can use them, other arts organizations can use them. So we're trying to create like tools and toolkits for people to access information about Latinx communities. Okay, and then just really quickly, the next slide. So we're doing that through 2 big projects. One which is Historias, which the slide before had a little image of. And Historias is a 3-year project that's really about commissioning special arts programming and art projects around, employing contemporary Latin American artists. But also it's about like things that were lost, things that were not archived, and making sure that we've turned those into proper archives. And then something else we're doing again is the Nueva York Chronicles, which is another platform that is basically taking all this information and making it searchable. And then the last thing I just want to plug, maybe the next slide. This is the last thing, promise. Is I just want to plug our June 14th big Historias Thinking in Public forum, which is called Cruces. And so that is really going to be thinking about 3 different questions. How do communities resist erasure through storytelling? What models of authorship, archiving, and public humanities are needed now? And how do we democratize cultural research itself? So those are the things that we're going to be talking about, and if anyone's interested, I hope you'll join us for that. So that's it. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thanks, everyone. I don't know that I need to say too much by way of introduction. Folks want to check out our work, nycfuture.org. I help to lead the research team at the Center for an Urban Future. We're an independent, nonprofit research and policy think tank focused on creating a more equitable economy in New York. And so I'll kind of come to this conversation by saying, I'm not only focused on the arts. I'm not an arts advocate per se. I'm a researcher. I like to think of my work as mobilizing facts and storytelling to make the case for good ideas. But I come to this work, honestly, because the research has made me absolutely convinced of the central importance of the arts and culture ecosystem to creating a thriving and equitable New York City. And I say that in the context of an advocacy conversation to say that we need advocates who aren't just folks from the arts sector. And I think our research really shines a light on not only why that's important, but why New Yorkers should care. And so I'm happy to talk much more about all of that, but that's kind of what brings me here today. I do have, I should admit though, my biases. I do have a background in this too. I was, among other things, a co-founder of an arts organization, a DIY art space in Bushwick, Brooklyn called the Silent Barn, which ran for many years in Brooklyn. So, really? All right, nice. Nice, so, I wouldn't be dressed like this. I'd be covered in paint. But I do have a deep and abiding love for not only the arts, but for the often unheralded work it takes to create those stages, and we need more of them.
Thank you, Eli, and thank you. Let's clap it up for the panelists. Yeah. And we'll stay with you because we want to really ground this conversation. We've been talking a lot about data, and of course we know effective advocacy includes data and relationship building, and those two things combined make effective advocacy. But I want to focus on the data a little bit. Your reports at CUF often highlight the economic and civic value of the creative sector. 10 years ago, CUF commissioned a report, Creative New York. Can you talk to us a little bit? It's 10 years now. I know you're coming up on some research and have been doing a deep dive into that report. Can you talk to us a little bit about the state of the arts and culture sector? Maybe share some of those early findings, whatever you can share with us today to help ground some of this conversation.
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much. Well, I'll say a couple things. One is when I think about why arts and culture is so vital for the present and future of New York, a big part of it is where our economy is strong in the first place. Not just in the arts sector, we can talk about that in more detail, but really New York's secret sauce for decades has been our magnetism to people. And I'm a little biased there. I'm a New Yorker by choice. I came here when I was 18, I fell in love and I never left, and my family's here and my roots are here, and I'm gonna hopefully stay here till the day I die. But New York thrives on being that global magnet. And companies that want to start here or grow here, the secret sauce is that they can attract workers from all over the world who want to be here. And New Yorkers who are born and raised here want to stay. And nothing other than housing plays a bigger role in that. We'll talk about that. Plays a bigger role in that than our cultural vitality. So when we talk about what it takes to continue to grow a thriving economy in New York, and we need a thriving economy because those dollars are what allows us to invest in a strong social safety net, especially now when it's under assault from the federal government. It allows us to invest in programs that, whether it's childcare or healthcare programs or education that help to lift up all New Yorkers, we need a thriving economy to do any of those things. But the reason that those companies come here and stay here and grow here, it's not the tax incentives. It's not because they're going to get an extra couple dollars back because they, hire more employees here. It's not even the, financing assistance to relocate or to renovate an office space. Those things can help for sure, but the number one reason is because of the talent. And when you ask folks why they're here, it's because of our cultural vitality. So if that is under threat, we lose the absolute engine of our economic success. That leads me to my second point, I guess, which is that economic engine is under threat right now. I see the warning lights flashing yellow and I think in some cases flashing red. And so when I talk about why we need advocates in the room who aren't just from the arts sector, it's because when you talk to those folks that are building their companies here, by the way, since the pandemic, 41% of all the net new jobs created in New York City have been in the tech sector. But when you talk to folks in tech about what really makes a difference in terms of growing here and staying here, at a time when those companies are more location independent than ever with remote work and folks realizing, look, I could make a New York or New York adjacent salary, but live in Asheville, North Carolina, or Denver, Colorado, or Mexico City. So why do I have to be in New York? The answer is you don't have to be in New York. That's in some ways the bad news, but you want to be in New York because it is the most culturally vibrant place in the world. So we have that case to make. We've made it successfully for generations, for centuries, but it's under threat right now. And so I'll share a couple data points and turn it over to my amazing colleagues here. But we have always heard the story, right, in the arts about how artists are leaving. We've been telling the story for decades. It's before I was born, we've been telling the story. And it's true, folks burn out or they can't, they're like, look, this city's so tough. No one comes to New York because it's easy. And we lose artists, and, whether it's to Detroit or Berlin or Mexico City or, Baltimore or whatever, it happens. It happens every year. It's just that we've always seen, no matter how prevalent that story is, that our artist population continues to grow. And what we've seen since the pandemic is that finally, for the first time, that story is turning out to be true. We are losing our artists right now. We've been losing our artists. We saw the single biggest decline in our resident artist population ever in 2020, and we haven't recovered. Our artist population is still down about 5% from 2019. So we have a big red light right there telling us, the value proposition of New York, it's not adding up anymore. Childcare costs are up 35, 40% since the pandemic. Housing costs are up 35, 40%. Are artists' incomes up 35 or 40%? Are cultural workers' incomes up 40%? No, so it wasn't ever the case that the reason to be in New York was because it was easier, a cheap place to live. It's just that the opportunity here outweighed all of the things that make it so hard to be a New Yorker sometimes. And really, I think since the pandemic, that logic has shifted. And that's a huge threat. And of course, who's disproportionately impacted by the growing costs at a time when wages haven't kept pace? It's artists of color. It's creative workers who are paid the least in our creative workforce. It's our museum workforce and other folks that just can't make it work here anymore. So that's one kind of big red warning light. The other one I would point to is that we're also seeing for the first time since I've looked at this data, we're seeing a loss of jobs in our broader creative economy. Our film and TV sector is down 15% from where we were in 2019. But that's not just film and TV. With the combination of the pandemic and then the strikes, we're seeing it in advertising. We're seeing it in design. We're seeing it in architecture. So across the board, and that's a very different story. There's really two totally different stories. It's not 2015 to 2025. It's really everything up until 2019 and then where we are now. We're in a completely different trajectory. That's problematic for lots of reasons, but one reason is a lot of those creative industries are where our artists work. Folks that can't make a living from their artistic practices work in many of those creative industries, and we've seen a very different picture since 2019. So that gives me a lot of concern, and I think to me it motivates or should motivate why the advocacy needs to extend way beyond the arts sector and really speaks to the foundations of a thriving and equitable economy.
Thank you so much for that. And I want to stay with you just for a second because you spoke about sort of the disinvestment in the arts, but you also talked about just the increase of the tech sector here, the presence of the tech sector here, right? 41% of the employees are part of the tech sector. But, the question that we ask here is what is the reinvestment from the tech sector to the arts? Or how do we think about or develop earned revenue models, step away from traditional fundraising models for our arts and culture sector, that, different ways, how do we think differently about how we can support the work that we do, that go outside, that respond to the time that we're in, right, post, 2020. So I'll start with you, but then I want to bring it to the rest of the panelists.
Sure. Well, I'll keep it brief because, I'd love to hear from everybody else too. But, I think you're speaking to a couple of things. One is the advocates on the stage in this room have actually done a great job of advocating for more public funding for the arts, more so than I think people give themselves even credit for. Funding through the Cultural Development Fund, through the Department of Cultural Affairs, has increased over the past decade by almost 80%. That is faster than the growth in the artist population, the growth even in cultural nonprofits, which have grown a lot. But just to say, I'm not saying the work is done. I'm saying the advocacy has actually borne more fruit than I think folks realize. Some folks realize. Now, this is not the same story from the NEA. Funding's down 68% since 2000, and it may go to zero this year. There's a big risk there. Funding from the state has increased the last couple of years, but it's still down about 33% after adjusting for inflation from when it peaked way back in 1990. So the state and the federal government, there's a lot of work to do there. But to the heart of your question is, so much of the value of the arts is not ever measurable into the direct or even the indirect economic impact. And maybe this is a controversial thing to say. I almost think we talk about that too much, meaning to just make the case for the arts based off of the arts economic impact rather than saying the arts sector is the reason why we have a thriving economy in the first place, Not that the economic impact, direct impact isn't important, So with that in mind, I think there's a lot of things we should do, but I do think we need to talk about dedicated recurring revenue for the arts that goes outside of the Department of Cultural Affairs, which, by the way, you mentioned 1%, funding for the arts, maybe in other places nationally. Here in New York City, we have the largest, municipal budget for the arts in the country, but it's still just 1/4% of the city budget, right? That can't sustain a thriving and equitable arts and culture sector. So I think there's a couple things we need to do there. I mean, just very briefly. One is dedicated recurring revenue outside of where we fight every year over the allocation for DCLA. And a couple of ideas for that. For instance, we propose an idea for a voluntary surcharge on overnight hotel stays in New York City to fund a parks and culture fund. Even a single dollar on overnight hotel stays would generate tens of millions of dollars a year that I would argue could be allocated equitably to arts organizations focusing on those that are underinvested in communities. That's one idea. But that's tens of millions of dollars. The CDF in total is only $80 or $90 million a year. So that would be maybe 50% of what we invest today in cultural nonprofits we could generate just with that one idea alone. And we have a lot more, but that's one example. The other thing I'll just briefly say is we've got to look to the rest of government for more investment in the arts. It can't just be DCLA's responsibility. We've got things like the Percent for Art program. We weren't the first in the country, but I think we were the second, and we've had that program for decades. But we do so little to really maximize the benefits of a program that's supposed to take 1% of all the capital investment that we do in New York City and allocate it to the arts. We could do so much more through whether it's Department of Education, through teaching artists and other things and fellowship programs, whether that's through the Parks Department, which has the biggest public art exhibition in the country. In the city is in our parks, but has a couple of staff members to manage public art across 30,000 acres of parkland. We're not doing nearly enough there. DOT, we've done a lot since the pandemic to bring art into public places, but funding is so limited, and maintenance dollars for community partners to bring public art into public spaces are almost non-existent in most communities. We've such missed opportunities there. So let me stop it just to say we've got to do better than just focusing on one agency with 1/4% of the city budget.
Thank you.
I would love to sort of add to an idea that you presented, as well as Natalia. I hear you talk about the arts and its advocacy practices, and I think maybe some of the ideas we have are similar. When I look out at our arts advocacy efforts, which I've been a part of, what I see is there's a lot of work in silo. And by that I mean that in what ways can we be more active in reaching out to other social service agencies, cradle to grave organizations who really understand fundamentally what arts and culture will bring to communities that are underserved, to join us in advocating for the arts in a variety of spaces and places where we know that they are needed and which there's been constant and chronic underinvestment. I love the idea as well, Eli, of having people who are staying in New York City join the chorus of information about how important it is. I think there also needs to be some education about where we might prioritize that in order to ensure that our economy is thriving throughout New York City, in addition to specific hubs where we know most of the infrastructure investments go to. And so how can we begin to have those kinds of conversations with people who have had very different life experiences than those who are in communities that are underinvested in? And I think it's really critical that we talk about issues of class here. As we even talk about the work that Cool Culture does and our passion to make sure that all people have access to the arts. As we talk about other Black and Brown organizations, I think we've been incredibly successful in bringing artists together to hold celebrations, moments of cultural, upholding our heritage, and often I see y'all there, right? And I love y'all, but there are other folks in the community that we also want to welcome in. And so what does that work look like? How can we start by asking folks that have not been asked why they're in New York, or who perhaps do not have the ability to hop cities, what it is that they would like to see. So I want to do two things. I want to shout out to Museum Hue, of course, for their 10th anniversary, and for their very bold Hue Arts paper and brown paper advocating for $100 million set aside to baseline in the city's budget for BIPOC organizations, as well as to bring together government and philanthropy to fund BIPOC organizations. I think that's really critically important, that we begin to have a different type of discussion, particularly since we know that with the powers that be within the administration, what we look like 3.5 years from now will look very different from what we are looking like now. And what is our wildest dream for what arts abundance looks like in communities? We are really proud at Cool Culture of work that we have just launched on the occasion of our 25th anniversary. So located in Bed-Stuy, we are launching a Parent Power for Cultural Equity initiative. It is a participatory action research project where we're asking a set of community members, at this point we're at 20, to do research on what abundance looks like for them in their community, with an ambition of being able to hold legislative breakfasts, conversations with city council member, people in the administration, so that they can hear very clearly from community members who are often without a microphone what it is that they want. What does investment look like for them? And this all, I think, connects back to the work of Create New York. So for those of you who might be new to this initiative, in 2017, the city published its first ever cultural plan, and that was mandated by the city council. And what we know from that is that the majority of New Yorkers, thousands who were asked, said that what they wanted was equity and access. And when they said access, they were talking about access to arts and culture in their communities without having to hop on the subway and travel. And what is it that we can do together? What is the reframing that's necessary to really bring the vision that we've been called to enact as those of us who are perhaps advocates or new to advocacy? How can we bring this vision alive? And I know I should be turning over the mic, but I want to ask a question of the audience. Who here in this audience considers themselves an advocacy guru? Can I see a raise of hands? Okay, next question. Okay? Who here in this audience has been involved in advocacy in some form or another? Okay, great. So what I want to say is that everybody in this room has perfected their advocacy skills as a child. You were expert at lobbying the powers that be, the adults that made the decisions in your life about what you wanted to see and what was in your own interest. And for those of you who have littles of your own in some form or fashion, whether it is as a parent, an auntie, an uncle, you have also stepped up to raise your hand to say, this is what I know about the child that I love, and this is what I want to see for them. And so at Cool Culture, we're a family-focused program, and we really want to drill down to the hyper-local. We want to ask people who would say that they're not gurus to rethink that, especially at this time when we cannot afford to be passive. And so I'm just inviting all of you. We are creating an advocacy council for the work that I described in Bed-Stuy. Please come see me if you're interested or learning more, because ultimately we want to spread this movement to something that is more citywide.
Thank you for that. That's a good segue. It's a question I wanted to ask you, because we want to leave our audience with some tools, right? And so, just being sort of more direct, like, what are those strategies that you have found to be most effective when advocating on behalf of the sector or families or children? And how do we demystify that process, right? Working with government partners or elected officials, how do we hold them accountable? How do we see them as partners and not, people that want to work with us in advancing our work? And so I'll start with you and pass it to the rest of the group.
Sure. I think it starts with deep listening, right, to community, to understand what it is that they want to see in terms of arts and access. I think you've heard Coco speak a little bit about how she's doing that at BAM and really thinking about what community members are interested in. And from there, working with them to develop programs that reflect their interests. Doing an assessment to see whether it actually hit the mark, and then calling up legislators, trying to get in contact with people who are part of community boards to report on what you found and to ask for funding to support the effort. So I know we have limited time, and I'm happy to talk more
I
about
want to
that.
pass it over to
offside.
Coco,
Yeah.
too, who's the chair of the Cultural Institution Group, and so in her role works directly with our government partners to advocate on behalf of the sector. And so I'd love for you to speak more about that partnership and what that work looks like.
What if I don't want to talk about that?
So you can talk about.
No, I'm doing the deep listening right now on the panel, and I think Eli talked about it a little bit. We have had some significant wins that are really helpful. It is taken an incredible amount of work to get back to zero. And we do that every year. This is like the city budget dance. And we do that every year. And we've found ways to work better as a whole sector, to increase the pie, but then we end up getting into these, well, who gets what part of the pie? And then it all relies on a government agency in DCLA that changes, that's political, that changes every however many years. And therein has inherent dysfunction, right? No shade on anybody leading that or working in those places at any time, but the turnover and the nature of being so political makes it hard to build a sustained wins over. But having said that, we've had tremendous wins. We in that we survived some of the cuts. They weren't all restored. We did get this, this big news of $45 million being baselined, which is nothing to sneeze at. Like a baseline of that amount is huge. And it is because of us, not just relying on each other and coming together, but it is about mapping out what culture and arts and culture means in every neighborhood, in every household, to everybody, to the restaurants in our neighborhoods, to the schools in our neighborhoods, to the families. That is what the advocacy has spoken to. It's spoken to using the data as a storytelling method. So I do think we have a good roadmap to continue that work. I do think we are, and not to say this in front of my kids, but we are really witnessing the demise of these structures. So us over-investing in really learning how to improve in this moment, our advocacy on the city, the state, or the federal level leaves us very open to the crises that are coming. So that's why I say, talking about it, I think it's helpful, and I love that what Candice just asked, like, my children didn't know what an advocate is. They were like, what is arts advocacy? And yet they are the most compelling advocates in my life on a daily basis. It's never enough. They always want more, and they make a really good case about why they need that more, and they usually win. And so, and I would say that they understand advocacy very well. And us understanding how we can be doing that, how to understand, it's not about higher art, it's not about low art, it's not about a specific culture. It's everybody in New York has an artist practice, right? Think about people who are braiding hair on Fulton, all up, like the art, that come out and you're looking amazing. Think about makeup artists, think about, and you said all of the creative industry, think about people that have, that are sewing clothes. Like there's so many artists among us, and I would argue there's not any non-artists among us. And how do we use that reality to advocate for the support of our field, of our sector, so that more people can be professional artists, but also that arts can be invigorated and we can all thrive in that kind of environment. So it's a little of thinking above. I think as artists and as an arts community, the show must go on means that we live in a crisis environment, right? You know, if you're a performer, like a bad tech rehearsal means a good show, right? Or a bad dress rehearsal means a really good show. That is crisis culture, right? You're like, oh, this is going to be terrible. And then it's like, oh, this was amazing. We already know we're good at that. We know we're good at it is a distraction and it tires us out to be in crisis. So, but we have functions, we have ways of doing that. We have to now look down the road beyond the crisis and what is coming. And I do think the tech piece is what's coming, right? The tech industry and how they are not reinvesting. There isn't a circle of reinvestment. There's not even a circle of reinvestment within our own industry. I work in a performing arts venue. Broadway, yes, we get some commission if art goes to commercial industry, but only if they get their profits first. And there isn't even a dollar or a nickel on every Broadway ticket sold that goes to our sector, and that's in our sector, right? So those revenue streams need to be explored, advocated for. And this is not nothing new. I'm not saying anything new that anybody hasn't thought about before, obviously. So I don't want to put that out there that way. But we should be looking beyond this current crisis in democracy and thinking about what, I can't remember who said it, but what our abundance looks like. Candice said, what abundance looks like and how we demand that or advocate for that abundance from all the people that feed off of us, that we create their own abundance for. I don't know if that answered your question, but
Thank you. That was great.
Talk to me later about DCLA and how to advocate. I'll do that too.
That was wonderful. Thank you. That covered a lot of ground. Natalia, I want to give you some time. The Clemente has long served as a hub for cultural resistance and Latine artist voices. What does cultural resistance and advocacy look like today? And how might that shift in the face of increasing political repression?
Well, I wanted to mention that I'm involved with 2 arts organizations who are currently going under major construction projects funded by the DCLA, and so we're very much in conversation with city funding. And it's a very challenging process to go through. And I like what we're all saying, which is that nothing can happen in a silo. And the more we realize that we do need to, yes, we can't highly invest in all these government structures because it's undergoing some serious challenges, but you should still know you're a city council person. You should still talk to the schools on your block. You should still, we kind of need every strategy all at once right now. And so, what does it look like? The Clemente is the hub, the OG hub of Puerto Rican activism. It was originally built in 1897, and it functioned as a school for boys for a period of time. Went bankrupt in the 70s, became a squatter space. Puerto Rican just local community members moved in, said we need a hub, we need a space to teach people, to do little community projects, to do language classes, to do all kinds of stuff that we need. So they started this incredible, active community space with no one's permission. And I think that that's the bottom line, is we don't need permission to need arts and culture. You look at the paintings of Lascaux or whatever. Arts and culture is in our blood. It is our right, and the more we can go out into the world and ask for more and not less, not mince ourselves into smaller and smaller and easily digestible pieces, but really just go out and be our, biggest, best selves and just, ask for all the things that we need. I think it's really important. And, I think that that's the blueprint that I follow, which is real grassroots activism. What space, I was just talking to Eli. I was like, you squeeze it, you will find more. I just took a little trip down Newtown Creek with Nat Rowe, who's the executive director of Flux Factory. And, Flux Factory were also, just buying our building and trying to figure things out. But we're also like, how can we do arts programming on the creek? Like, how can we do arts programming wherever, whenever, however? And I think that kind of urgency of just like, we need to do programming now with people, with whomever, like, let's get it going, is the kind of attitude that artists really bring. Artists really, and again, we all have rights to being an artist. We can all be creative thinkers. And I think that's the essence and the spirit of New York. It's like, just be creative, get whatever you need to 2 cents to rub together and like figure it out. And get more, if you look around and everyone looks like you, everyone sounds like you, change it up, change up the rhythm of that, situation. And I do think that at Flux, we do a good job. Our board has a lot of different types of, we have artists and we have different types of folks on the board, and at all like layers of arts organizing. I think if we can just look around and make sure that we have a diversity of like folks involved and different types of buy-in, then we're going to set ourselves up for much more success.
Can I just add one thing very quick? I did not mean to be flip about what it takes to advocate on the city level. And I want just to uplift a few things that with that, one thing that's very important, a tool of that, is data. And we looked back at at what cultural funding has been in the city. And we've said over and over again that it was, it had stayed flat since 2009. So we're decades of plateauing as the sector has expanded, as the city's budget has expanded by 90%, culture's funding only increased by 10%, right? So when we talk about culture's funding being only at 2.25%, actually currently we're at 0.23%. So when we start talking about we need 1% for culture, we are far off the plateau. So knowing that and advocating for that is very important and takes a lot of work. And there's really helpful data, or we use data to really help make the case to also, to further the argument of why the baseline needed to be increased. And the other thing I wanted to say is to echo off of what Eli said around, external validators, people outside of some of our best advocates for art not being artists, not being us. And so, it is looking at, it's the schools, of course, it's the restaurants, it's the community, it's the bodega, it's what does it mean when you have culture in your neighborhood, and how does that impact and really having those people show up and understand. And so I didn't want to, maybe I'm a little tired and it's budget season, so I'm sorry that I came off a little bit flip about it, but that it is very strategic, and I think we can have a whole strategic session around it. I just wanted to make sure we have voices and moments that we're thinking beyond it as well.
I want to agree too, because we wouldn't have our buildings without the city. So it's like the city stewardship is a huge deal and not to be diminished at all.
I would say, so I just want to say that, Coco, you provoked another thought, which is regarding data and the question of what data, what does data look like? And it can certainly be a collection of stories. I think we heard earlier about the importance of really making a visceral connection between the quantitative and the qualitative, and that's really key. I think that is also related to ensuring that we are collecting the data from folks who aren't really counted. A shout out again to Museum Hue for the culture map, but there are other folks that I know in conversation with Stephanie, we are still in the business of needing to document what the need is. And that gets me to the second point that for whatever reason you raised for me, which is that there are multiple steps to advocacy, and I do think that a follow-up session is called for. But I do want to point out that we all have different roles. And so as I look around this room, I am very clear that there are people here who are not in a position where they can go out on the street because there is fear. There are issues of safety. People do not necessarily have the ability to sort of yell and create posters, right? So there's a role for all of us. Some of it might be data collection. Others of us, it might be sitting in front of a legislator or other decision maker. And for others of us, it's actually articulating what the needs are and making a lot of noise.
Thank you all for that. We're getting close to time. I did want to shout out the city, of course, plays a big role in the state. Will continue to support the arts and culture sector, and so really looking at our city and state partners right now as we see a decrease in federal funding is going to be even more necessary during this time.
And philanthropy.
Yeah.
How about?
We're coming. All good. We're getting close to 4 o'clock, and I know we have an award ceremony that we want to get to, but I do want to end on a high note because we know the times are bleak, and but we know we have each other. And I want to just ask the rest, the panel, really, what gives you hope right now, and where should we be directing our energy in the next 6 to 12 months? Come on.
This is actually really easy for me.
Screaming into a bed.
Screaming into a pillow is a good way. But no, I really believe that I really believe that we have the tools to get through this moment. I do believe I trust my elders. I trust a lot of people that said, yes, we've been through things, but this is a very hard moment, and I've never seen anything like it. I do trust them in that, and also, I still believe in our future. I still believe that there is a future. I still believe in, one of the things I've been doing to give me hope is going to every music show I possibly can, and just understanding that culture and arts is like. It's untouchable, when an artist is able to continue to perfect their craft, they have such an impact, right? And so that drives me to not just, the Beyonce of it all, but the Asali of it all, the young person who's just starting on their artistic journey. And so that, it gives me hope. So it is I saw a funny meme that was like, I can't pay my bills, but I've been to 23 music concerts, right? Like, that's how I'm living. And it is kind of keeping an eye on this bigger manifestation of us than, the really hard and the reality pieces that are coming or that we're experiencing.
I think my response is similar, which is that what gives me hope is the same thing that's got me on the stage, right? Is a deep love of the arts because of its ability to allow folks, including me, to connect with themselves, to celebrate the uniqueness of my culture, to learn about those who have other lived experiences in other cultures. And I am clear that there are many different perspectives in this room, but I think by embracing the art, it creates a space where we're able to sort of break down the armor that we wear every day and that the society asks us to wear every day to a place where we're really focused on what do we have in common and how do we move forward together.
I love that. Mine is similar. It's a call to action. I want everyone to rest. I want you to actually dream big because we need your imagination now. I want you to break out your watercolors. I want you to make a painting. I want you to find a piece of chalk and write something. I want you to invite somebody else to do it with you. I want you to, if you have kids, to enjoy a conversation with them about what art and art making means to them. And I want us to meet at the library. I want us to meet at the park. And I want us to celebrate all those spaces in between that connects us. And we're gonna get through this. It's not gonna be comfortable, but we have to. We have to do it. So that's it.
That's a lot to follow, but I think what gives me hope is, we talked about this. We've always talked about the idea that we need to reframe the conversation about the arts from a nice to have to a necessity. And I think going into the pandemic, it was still a struggle every year to make that case. I said at the beginning I'm not an advocate, but I don't know if that's true. I think I am an advocate, but I try to do it with the facts. And I think the facts were that it was very difficult to break through that lens, to make that case all the way through until 2020. I think in 2020, not just the pandemic, but George Floyd's murder and the moment that we found ourselves in as a society, it really crystallized for, I think, many of us that the arts are absolutely vital to survival and thriving in New York City and everywhere, And I'm not saying that work is done, but I do think that there's a shift that started to happen then that I would say, if I'm optimistic about something, is that I think that shift continues to this moment. When Coco, when you're talking about, what gives you hope is like you go see music. I mean, me too, and then some. It's like, it's really seeing how many of my folks in my community, my neighbors, my friends, people that I meet, all of you, we've recognized more than ever, I think, that the arts are absolutely essential to our well-being. And it gives me hope because I think it's started to break through the idea that, well, when times get tough, we can kind of cut the arts. I mean, the role that artists played in helping us get through the pandemic and through to the other side in healing, in holding space for communities who are experiencing trauma, in giving us visions of a better future, which we needed then and now more than ever in dealing with what we're seeing from Washington. We need artists more than ever in these times, and the art is, I would say, better than ever. I continue to feel like the art is better than ever. So those are some things that give me hope. I think in terms of 6 to 12 months where we go from here, I mean, a couple thoughts. One is, I do think we need to not overly focus on DCLA's budget. I think part of the challenge is, and I think it's got to be more than just advocacy saying we need to support the arts. We do that and we hear a lot of it. I think part of the challenge is we need specific asks that go beyond the budget that we can coalesce around collectively, that mobilize advocates from outside the sector. And I would take it a step further and say we need to see the arts coalescing around some advocacy that affects all New Yorkers, not just the arts. Of course, the arts affects all New Yorkers, but by that I mean, look, artists right now, creative people in New York City, folks that work in the broader creative economy, they are earning 26% less after you adjust for the cost of living in New York than the national average. So, folks here are finding it harder. The data backs it up, You might get paid a little less in Nashville or Austin, or Miami or wherever, but your cost of living is so much lower that it makes more sense to be a creative person in those places economically than it does here. And that number has gotten, that gap has gotten worse, So we've got to advocate around, I think, some of the data that says, look, there is an existential threat to New York's well-being right now, but also to say, what are those kind of specific asks? Well, what's the biggest driver of that gap right now? It's housing. We cannot afford to live in the city. So to see the arts sector get behind, and we talked about abundance, an abundance agenda for housing that will actually find alliances, find allegiances in the tech sector, believe it or not, in other parts of our economy, and in social services and other places, but to say we need to address housing instability and the fact that we can't afford to live in this city for all of us, and the arts could be a powerful part of advocating for that effectively. I would say the same for childcare, although I'm biased. I've got 2 little kids under 5, so desperate need right now. But that's issues that affect so many New Yorkers. Artists have the uniquely capable of advocating, but we need to see those connections and say that's an agenda we all need to get behind. And then on the other side of the equation is to make sure that the other folks that care passionately about social infrastructure in New York, our libraries, same battles over the budget, year in and year out, but to see, can we get a joint advocacy effort, parks and libraries and culture, advocating for a small number of specific, not small things, but a small number of specific big things, We've got ideas, we're probably out of time, but those are things I'd love to see in the year ahead.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Let's give it up for the panelists.
Thank you all.
Let's give it up one more time for Stephanie Cunningham and the entire Museum Hue team, Adrian, Brittany. I want to give a round of applause to BRIC's production and operations team, our creative workers who made today possible. Thank you all so much for being here today. And for one of our biggest advocates, I want to shout out Lucy Sexton, who I see New York is for Arts and Culture, who's one of our biggest advocates. Thank you. We've learned so much from you.